Buyer's market, buyer's market, buyer's market. That's what everybody is saying and their cousins. But is this true? Let's turn to the data and determine whether this is, in fact, a buyer's market or maybe not. Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Steve Moon, your San Jose Realtor. And on this channel, we talk about everything that's real estate related and sort of lifestyle that happens in San Jose and Silicon Valley. Let's turn to the data and determine whether it is true or maybe not quite so. So it is true on a national level and here in Silicon Valley and California as well that we are seeing a dramatic increase in inventory. That is a fact. So it is true that inventory levels have gone up dramatically. And if you're looking at year over year, on a national as well as here in California and Silicon Valley, the increase in listing activity is anywhere from 50 to maybe 60% or more. And we've come to a point where we've had more active inventories right now than we have seen in several past years. So in order for us to better understand how this inventory level has been changing, we have to understand the deep interconnection between mortgage rates and housing. And those changes have been very significant in the past 3 years since we're coming out of the post-pandemic recession, basically. Although we don't officially acknowledge it, but everybody has lived through it. And we know that after the pandemic, we were basically, for a short period, in a recession. And that is why the interest rates dropped so significantly. And we were down to below, most of us remember, below 3% in mortgage rates. And as you see here in this chart, we started to creep up, and in the basically summer of 2022 is when we hit 6% and above, and we saw, and basically we've stayed above that since, and have gone up as high as 8%. And as we will see later, borrowing costs have a huge impact on buyer activity or their behavior, which also has a direct impact on seller activity. As more buyers come onto the market, you see sellers and their activity increase, whereas when the buyer activity shrinks due to higher costs, then the sellers also react to the availability of buyers and their activity. So everything is deeply intertwined to borrowing costs. And as you can see here in the graphs, the moment the mortgage rate doubled, so did we see the inventory level double as well, meaning that these homes were not selling, so they were just staying on the market as unsold inventory. And there's a direct correlation of the spiking of activities. And we saw inside the market that both buyers and sellers initially were in shock at how quickly the rates had risen. And after falling out of that initial shock, sort of went into this mode of hoping and wishing that the lower rates would come back. So for the next 2.5 years, a lot of buyers and sellers were on the sidelines. And even though life was happening, they chose to wait and not to either buy or to sell, hoping and waiting for that rate to return back down to the 3% level. But as we saw for the next 2.5 years, that did not happen. The rates had continued to hover between 7 to as high as 8.1 and then back down now to the high sixes. And it's been that way for the past almost 3 years. And now people have finally come to the realization that that wishful thinking and hoping is not going to come back. And beginning of this year, after the elections, the people decided that they were going to continue to live their lives and not just put everything on hold in terms of hoping and wishing for lower rates to return. So that's why we saw a tremendous increase this year of inventory levels, because all that pent up demand of people who were waiting since 2022 when the rate initially spiked and hoping and waiting, now they decided to stop waiting and basically continue to live on with their lives. So in order to tighten up the data, rather than using all of Santa Clara County, where the discrepancy is huge between prices in places like Gilroy all the way up to Palo Alto. I chose to look at San Jose, the biggest city, and that way we will have less of that dramatic difference and a little bit more consistent in pricing. That way it'll give us a better understanding of numbers on a more even level. So if you look at San Jose, so this is for single family homes. In January of 22, that's before the mortgage rate above hit above 6%, which is in the summertime in July. We see that this is months of inventory, meaning how many months it would take to completely sell out what's currently on the market. It went from less than a month all of a sudden to above 2.5, maybe 2.7 months of inventory. And again, that's a direct correlation between the mortgage rate shooting up and also inventory of homes shooting up, meaning that they weren't selling. So they just stayed on the market as unsold inventory. And we saw that for the next several months. And this ties into the notion that mortgage rates are directly impacts the buying activity of the buyers and sellers. And this ties into the notion that mortgage rates affect both sides of the transaction when it comes to home sales. After several months, we see the inventory level drop because people had essentially become acclimated to the high rates. They saw that the rates weren't really fluctuating or on a downwards trend as they had thought. Uh, so the sellers started to keep properties off the market. They stepped on the sidelines and decided to wait for the rates to eventually come down or come back to 3%, which obviously did not happen until this year when they came to the realization that life had to continue and just hoping and waiting for rates to fall back wasn't going to stop the world from moving forward. So they decided to move forward. And that's why we saw not just here, but on a national level, again, after the elections, that they were going to stop waiting and put all the properties that were on the sidelines back into the marketplace. Although the rates hadn't dropped and were actually creeping up a little bit. So that explains the increase in inventory just this year alone, that's up 50 to 60 or even percent higher than what it was last year. Despite all the crowing in the media that the current inventory level is the highest it's been in several years nationwide and everywhere else, well, we can see here in San Jose that's not quite accurate because the inventory level was much higher at the beginning of summer of 22 when the mortgage rates initially spiked. We see that it was above 2.7, whereas now we're at less than 2% or less than 2 months worth of unsold inventory. So again, nationally and locally, the market reacts differently. And even within San Jose, the market reacts differently between single family homes and townhomes and condos because this is a graph of townhomes and condos. And we can see now we're at approaching 4 months worth of unsold inventory. And that is the highest it's been in several years. In quite a bit different than the single family market in the same city. So again, it depending on the type of property, the market is reacting differently. Inventory level is obviously important in the marketplace for both the buyers and sellers. But what is even more important is the pricing, how the market reacts in terms of pricing. So this is a chart of the list price to sales price, meaning what it was listed for and what it ultimately sold for. And for single family homes, as we saw in the beginning of 22, when the mortgage rates were still in the 3%, we were selling single family homes at nearly 20% above list price. And then that drops dramatically to the summertime when we hit the 6%, basically 100%. And then for several months, it dropped to below 100% for single family homes, which was unheard of for several years. And then again, you see it trending. And then now we are at about 103% list to sale ratio. meaning the homes that are selling for about 3% above this price. So the same chart for townhomes and condos. So it went from 112% to now at about 101%. But keep in mind that the inventory is now nearly 4 months worth of unsold inventory. So obviously the pricing will also be affected since there's 4 months worth of inventory compared to single family homes where it's still less than 2%. So same market, even within the different segments and the type of homes, the market is reacting differently in terms of inventory as well as pricing because they're all interconnected. So to better understand, let's take the concept of these interest rates and put actual numbers to it for better understanding. So let's take a property that's worth 1.25 million. Uh, get a loan for 1 million. Okay. If you were to get a loan for $1 million at 3%, which was back then, the monthly payment would have been $5,868 a month. Take the same loan and then fast forward and change that to 6.8%, which is right around now. And that same loan, the monthly payment would be $8,071 or an increase of 40%. So think about that. So your job or your take home pay for most people during the past 3 years did not increase by 40%. But the mortgage payment, because of the mortgage rate increase, did increase by 40%. That's why there was so much hesitation and sitting by the sidelines and praying and wishing for those rates to come back down. Perfectly understandable. It's just that it wasn't going to happen. And it took 3 years for people to come to that realization. And then life just had to continue and move forward. So, what does this mean? What is the takeaway? The takeaway is that the homes that are selling, whether it's a single family home or a townhome or a condo, the ones that are top tier quality, great location, something that is of value, those are selling and selling for above this price and selling fairly quickly. What's not selling, however, are homes that are not updated, are not in the best of locations. So basically, homes that are meh, those are the ones that are not selling and being added on to unsold inventory. So if it's a single family home, it's 2 months worth of inventory, so it'll fall into that. If it's a townhome or a condo, you're falling into a potential 4 month inventory of unsold properties that you're competing with. So the desirability factor becomes a greater role now than it has ever been before. So those people who are looking at last year or the year before's market and looking at that data and saying, oh, I'm just going to throw my property on the market and let the buyers deal with it, that's not happening. Only the ones that are top tier quality are the ones that are being picked out of that market, and then rest of it is being dumped into the unsold inventory. So that is the takeaway. The homes have to be something special in order for them to be picked out. And obviously, there are a lot of them that are being picked out and taken out of the marketplace. It's just all the other stuff that's not exceptional falling into the unsold category. And that's what you want to avoid as a seller. And as a buyer, that's where opportunities exist because those are the ones that are sitting around waiting for buyers. And all the potential negotiations can happen there to pick up those unsold homes. So, are we in a buyer's market like everybody is screaming? Depends. And by the definition of a buyer's market is 6 months or more of inventory. Anything below 6 months is supposed to be still a seller's market. So obviously it needs to be calibrated, but 6 month is the midpoint. So for single family homes, we're still at less than 2 months. So that's far from being a buyer's market. Uh, uh, Townhomes and condos, they're approaching 4 months, so much closer to that 6 month dividing line. So it really depends on not only area, but also the type of homes. So much more demand, obviously, for single family homes, especially with lots, because if you're in Silicon Valley, you know the traditional single family home ranch style with the 5 to 7,000 square foot lot, they're not building those anymore. So those are more in demand than anything else because they're becoming rarer and rarer. What we are building a lot of are townhomes and condos with no lots, obviously, right? So those are the ones that are going to be affected because the townhomes and condos that already exist, and especially the ones that are aging and getting older and older, because all we're building are those. So the desirability for those are diminishing because of inventory coming online. And especially because a lot of the builders are having difficulty selling them. So they're also giving great discounts and incentives to get them off their hands. So the market for townhomes and condos will be harder and harder as these inventory levels start to continually increase. And also consider that we're still in June right now, early June. So we're still entering into the summer season where we're going to be seeing potentially more properties coming onto the market. And also, this all gets tied back into mortgage rates. So we're still hovering, but once a lot of this stuff gets cleared up with the tariffs and all this passing of the bill and whatever, if the Fed decides to drop the rates, then we may be seeing a difference, a dramatic shift, just like we saw earlier with the impact of mortgage rate, how that drives everything in the real estate business. So as to where we are, depends on the mortgage rates and depends on inventory. Hope that helps. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe, and also hit that bell so that you'll be notified when another video drops.